before a darker night claimed her. 1. Present day, Clearwater, Florida. The examination table was cold and hard under her back as Harper Taylor looked around the room. She focused on the picture of a familiar Florida beach, which helped block out the doctor's movements and the smell of antiseptic. She'd been on the beach at Honeymoon Island yesterday, and she could still smell the briny scent of the bay and hear the call of the gulls. The ocean always sang a siren song she found impossible to resist. Calm. Peace. The smell of a newborn baby's head. All done. Dr. Cox's face came to her side and she was smiling. Lie here for about 15 minutes, and then you can get dressed and go home. She tugged the paper sheet down over Harper's legs. How soon will I know if the embryo transfer was successful? Though she'd researched the process to death, she wanted some assurance. 2 weeks. I know right now it seems like an eternity, but those days will pass before you know it. I've already submitted the lab requisition for a beta HCG test. If we get a positive, we'll track the counts every few days to make sure they are increasing properly. Dr. Cox patted her hand. Hang in there. She exited the room, leaving Harper alone to stare at the ceiling. Her longing for a child brought tears to her eyes. She'd felt empty for so long. Alone. And she'd be a good mom. She knew she would. All the kids in the church nursery loved her, and she babysat for friends every chance she got. She had a wealth of patience, and she'd do everything in her power to make sure her child knew she or he was wanted. She slipped her hand to her stomach. The gender didn't matter to her at all. She could love either a boy or a girl. It didn't matter that this baby wasn't her own blood. The little one would grow inside her, and the two of them would be inseparable. Once the 15 minutes were up, she was finally able to go to the bathroom and get dressed. She already felt different. Was that a good sign? Or was it all in her head? She slipped her feet into flip-flops, then headed toward the reception area. The tension she'd held inside melted when she saw her business partner, Oliver Jackson, in the waiting room, engrossed in conversation with an attractive woman in her 50s. She hadn't been sure he'd be here. He'd dropped her off, then gone to practice his bagpipes with the band for the Scottish Highland Games in April. He said he'd be back, but he often got caught up in what he was doing and lost track of time. It wouldn't have been the first time he'd stood her up. Oliver was a big man, well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a firm stomach from the hours spent in his elaborate home gym. She'd always wondered if he colored his still dark hair or if he was one of those lucky people who didn't gray early. Even here, in a fertility clinic, this man in his 60s turned women's heads. She'd watched them fawn over him for years, and he'd had his share of relationships over the 15 years since his divorce. But Oliver never stuck with one woman for long. Was there even such a thing as a forever love? She hadn't seen any evidence of it, and it felt much safer to build her life without expecting that kind of faithfulness from any man. Having a child could fill that hole in her heart without the need to be on her guard around a man. He saw her and ended his conversation, then joined her at the door. His dark brown eyes held concern. You changed your mind? She shook her head. Not a chance. It seems an extreme way to go about having a family. You're only 30. There's plenty of time to have children in the traditional way. Only 30? There's not even a boyfriend in the wings. Besides, you don't know what it's like to long for a family all your life and never even have so much as a cousin to turn to. She knew better than to try to explain her reasons. No one could understand the guard she'd placed around her heart, unless they'd lived her life. His brow creased in a frown. I tried to find your family. I know you did. All he had discovered was her mother, Lisa Taylor, had died moments after Harper's birth. Oliver had never been able to discover her father's name. Harper still had unpleasant memories of her grandmother, who had cared for Harper until she was 8 before dying of a drug overdose at 50. Hard as those years were, her grandmother's neglect had been better than the foster homes where Harper had landed. This embryo adoption was going to change her life.